Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling guilty, even though you weren't sure you had done anything wrong? That's often how manipulation works. It doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers. It wraps itself in a tone of concern, a favor, or a gentle suggestion, leaving you with a vague sense of unease, wondering if you are the problem. In the realm of biblical psychology, manipulation is a fascinating and destructive phenomenon because it fundamentally distorts the way God designed us to connect. At its core, manipulation is the attempt to gain control over another person without being honest about your true motives. It is influence stripped of love, and it is far more common in our daily interactions than we might like to admit. The most difficult thing about manipulation is that it rarely looks evil when it begins. In fact, it usually looks like kindness. This is why it catches us off guard. To understand this, we have to look at the very first instance of manipulation recorded in human history. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent didn't approach Eve with a pitchfork or a demand. He approached her with a conversation. He twisted God's words just enough to create confusion. He didn't deny God's rule entirely. He simply asked, "Did God really say?" This is the anatomy of manipulation. It introduces a subtle alternative reality. It makes you doubt your own memory, your own understanding of truth, and ultimately, your own judgment. The serpent didn't feel insecure to Eve. He felt curious, almost helpful, and that is exactly why it worked. But why do people manipulate others in the first place? We often assume manipulators are powerful people trying to dominate the weak, but Scripture reveals a different psychological truth. Manipulation rarely begins with power. It usually begins with insecurity, fear, pride, or a deeply rooted selfish desire. When someone feels they cannot get their needs met through honest, vulnerable requests, they resort to hidden tactics. They manipulate because they feel powerless, and they are trying to manufacture a sense of control. Think of Jacob and Rebekah manipulating Isaac to steal the blessing meant for Esau. It was born out of favoritism and impatience. The manipulator feels that if they were just honest, they would be rejected. So, they hide their true intentions behind a mask. One of the most common masks is flattery. We don't often think of a compliment as a weapon, but in the hands of a manipulator, it absolutely is. Flattery is praise with a hidden agenda. It is designed to lower your defenses by making you feel special or important. The book of Proverbs warns us repeatedly about this, noting that a flattering mouth works ruin. We see this perfectly in the life of Absalom, King David's son. Absalom wanted to take the throne from his father, but he didn't start a military coup. Instead, he sat at the city gate, and whenever people came to the king for justice, Absalom would intercept them. He would listen to them, agree with them, tell them they were right, and imply that he would do a better job than David. He stole the hearts of the people by making them feel deeply validated, but his validation was a trap. It was a calculated strategy to undermine his father. Genuine encouragement builds you up so you can stand on your own. Flattery builds you up so you will lean on the manipulator. When flattery doesn't work, manipulators often turn to a much heavier weapon, guilt. Guilt is an incredibly powerful emotional lever. If someone can make you feel responsible for their pain, their disappointment, or their anger, they own your choices. We see this tragic dynamic in the story of Samson and Delilah. Delilah didn't physically overpower Samson. She used relentless emotional pressure. Day after day, she pouted, she cried, she accused him of not loving her. "How can you say you love me," she asked, "when you won't tell me your secret?" She turned his boundaries into evidence of his lack of love. This is emotional blackmail. It makes you feel that saying no is an act of betrayal. And it works because most of us are good people who genuinely care about the feelings of others. The manipulator exploits our empathy. They use our desire to be loving against us, turning our virtues into vulnerabilities. There are other, quieter forms of this as well. The silent treatment is a form of manipulation that uses fear and abandonment to punish someone into compliance. We see a variation of this with King Ahab, who would sulk and refuse to eat when he didn't get his way, manipulating those around him into catering to his desires. Then there is the tactic of selective truth, famously used by the Pharisees when they tried to trap Jesus. They would ask him questions about paying taxes, acting as though they genuinely wanted his wisdom, but their motive was hidden. They weren't seeking truth, they were seeking a reason to accuse him. They used half-truths and false premises to set a snare. In all of these forms, whether it is flattery, guilt, silence, or intellectual traps, the mechanism is the same. It is control without consent. This brings us to a crucial distinction we must understand if we are going to navigate relationships with wisdom. What is the difference between healthy influence and manipulation? The difference is transparency and freedom. Influence operates in the light. When someone wants to influence you honestly, they tell you exactly what they want, why they want it, and they leave you completely free to say yes or no. Manipulation operates in the dark. It hides the real goal, and it uses psychological pressure to ensure you say yes. When we look at the life of Jesus Christ, we see the perfect model of healthy influence. Think about it. Jesus had absolute truth, ultimate authority, and the power of God at his disposal. Yet, he never manipulated anyone to follow him. He never used guilt trips. He never used flattery. He simply spoke the truth, often in love, and invited people to make a choice. Remember the rich young ruler? Jesus looked at him, loved him, and told him what he lacked. The young man walked away sad, and Jesus let him go. Jesus did not chase him down and say, "Wait, if you don't do this, you're going to break my heart." He respected the young man's freedom. Biblical love always respects freedom. Manipulation hates freedom, because if you are free to say no, the manipulator might not get what they want. So, how do we protect ourselves in a world where these tactics are so common? The Bible calls us to a middle ground. We are not called to be naive, assuming everyone has pure motives. But we are also not called to become suspicious, cynical people who see a manipulator behind every smile. Jesus told his disciples to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. This means we need to learn to recognize the patterns. When you feel that sudden wave of unexplained guilt, pause. Ask yourself, did I actually do something wrong? Or is someone trying to make me feel responsible for their feelings? When someone flatters you excessively, ask yourself, what do they want from me? When a conversation feels like a trap, you don't have to answer on the spot. You can take time. You can say, I need to think about that. Setting healthy boundaries is not manipulative. It is protective. When someone uses emotional pressure, the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to refuse to play the game. You can speak the truth calmly. You can say, I love you, but I am not going to make this decision based on guilt. And perhaps the hardest part of all is ensuring that we do not become manipulators ourselves. When we feel insecure, when we are afraid someone will leave us, or when we desperately want our own way, the temptation to use a subtle tactic, to drop a hint, to give the silent treatment, or to twist the facts is incredibly strong. We have to guard our own hearts, choosing honesty even when it feels risky. As you reflect on these patterns, you might recognize them in a coworker, a family member, or a friend. But if we are truly honest, if we look deeply into our own motives, we might also recognize these patterns in ourselves. We have all, at times, hidden our true desires to get what we wanted. But the invitation of Scripture is to step into the light, to let go of the need to control. Manipulation seeks control. Love seeks freedom. The Bible calls us to become people whose words are so honest that control is no longer necessary.